All right, welcome to another totally rewarding chats. This will be the last drop before we show up at World at Work. Um, I am Sean. Those who know, I am just back from vacation and unplanned, but happened. Paul also back from vacation today. So we are feeling super bad for Liz as we come off vacation and have her on. So how's it going, Paul? Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. When you own your own business, like you kind of have to come back, right? Like you had a choice, so it should be kudos to salary for you actually choosing to come back. But you know,
Well, and hopefully you had a good vacation. I know my kids are almost all off the payroll and I hung out and that was great. You need a vacation from your vacation?
oh good God, like I'm happy to report the Florida economy is alive and well, and that jobs were created through my family's consumption of mouse-related products
Uh,
in the last week.
yeah, we had the girls trip they took in the fall was to the Mouse Land. I don't I'm sorry, we will not be sponsored by Disney Paul because I hate that movie. But you can't make me go. They've actually gone without me before. That's how much I don't like that.
Uh,
Um,
so there's going to be a new speed round question because I'm actually a
yeah.
big fan. I just wish it didn't cost like that.
I think that's part of the problem. My kids are old enough that my oldest is 28, so we went when she was 20, when she was 3. Actually, I will say maybe PTSD from that TMI. We went in October 2001, right after 9/11. Um, and after the cruelty of the Disney person working Small World to keep asking her every time if she wanted to go around again and only ask her was not cool. Highly uncool. So after 7 trips around Small World, I
Ooh,
was like, "Bruh, no,
it's
I have to get off for a little while.
yeah.
I
The
can't,"
world's going to be bigger. We need
because
to
there
get
was no
off
one
this
on. There
ride.
was no
Yeah,
one there. I mean, it's kind of
yeah.
cool because there were no lines, but also less cool because there were no lines in some shit.
No, I am proud to report that my 7-year-old can now do time math and can translate a number of minutes into how many hours and minutes that is, which maybe I shouldn't be impressed, but I found it impressive because he couldn't do it before last week. But when you tell him this is a 130-minute line, he knows how to do that math and say, oh, that's 2 hours and 10 minutes. I don't want to sit in that, Dad. I'm like, yes, you're right. Good answer, right? So that
It
was our
makes
big
me excited to
educational
see at
outcome.
what point is too much. So
Yeah.
welcome, Liz, to that
Hi.
after coming back. Oh, how are
Yeah, I
you?
don't think it's me either. But
Oh, you don't like Disney either?
the first time we took the kids, I got a divorce like a week later, and the record stamp was like last trip wasn't good either.
So actually, hold on, Paul, are you still married?
I am.
Okay,
I
okay.
wasn't expecting that as a potential
Yeah,
risk,
I was not
but
either. It's like, like, although to be fair, I could see that because that is not like that
totally,
is like I can see
totally.
that.
But as you know, Sean, like who was it? We were doing marital advice on an episode. Oh, it was with Jesper. We
Yeah.
were talking about the secrets to a long marriage, and I said like our secret is everybody knows in my marriage, I make the money, she spends the money. So anything that involves spending the money, like it's perfect for her. So Disney works out great for our family.
Oh. So Liz, can you give us your own intro so that I don't screw it up? Before we jump into the speed round and talking about some exec comp.
Sure, I am the head of total rewards for Bluebird, the giant yellow school bus company, and this is a public company that I get to focus on executive comp a good bit because they don't have comp consultants now. But executive comp is kind of my baby. I started there with comp, which is a little bit unusual. And I did the IPO for Carter's and their secondary offering. I've done the IPO for First Data, which was the biggest IPO of the year in 2015. And I've done a delisting more recently, which is reverse IPO, but not nearly as much fun.
Not as fun.
Um,
Yeah.
I've been with startups and in the SaaS space and fintech a lot, but I also been with the Honeywell and New Orme and those size companies too. So I like to bounce back and forth a little bit.
So actually, you mentioned you started in exec comp. This isn't a speed round question, but we end up there. Did you, when you were in school or prior, did you want to be in comp?
I didn't even know it was a thing. I went to Georgia Tech and it was like engineering was everything or management of one of those like, jobs. So I actually started in marketing and I went to Carter's for a marketing interview. And I had already decided I was done with marketing. I was student teaching. I mean, I was substitute teaching the day that I got called in for the interview. So I'm not really patient with teaching things to children. You can ask my kids. So
Yeah.
this was a good fit to pivot. I just didn't know it was a thing. They offered to teach me whatever because they needed somebody so bad. And the CHRO had gone through like 6 people in 6 weeks. So
Ah.
the sister.
Okay. So speed round of questions. You ready? Are you coffee or tea?
If it's tea, it's going to be Southern sweet tea or ice cold.
Okay. Are you? How do you get your caffeine then?
Oh, monsters all the time. I'm never without monster.
Yeah, I kind of knew. That's what I. So to be honest, I kind of knew that. That's why I was asking because I was expecting a monster to pop up.
Yeah.
Um, and you kind of answered already, but I know it's a passion point. Are Georgia or Georgia Tech?
Oh, Georgia Tech.
Um, the important one to answer. You have a weekend away. Do you want to go to a posh resort or do you want to go rough it in the woods?
The resort.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
went camping once and my dad called and I told him where I was and he said, "Are you drunk? Like, that's not something you do."
Like, I was waiting for you to pull out a Georgia bless your heart for Sean there. Like you are an idiot. Like that's what I saw coming there, Liz.
But I have to ask it. I can't. So your horse's name, breed, and like style you ride.
I show jumpers and the one I have right now is Harley D. I did not name him. He just came around with that. But I've had some of those cool names like Free Falling and so I don't know Harley, and he's a big gray Hinnevary Holsteiner from Canada, and he is the friendliest, sweetest thing. And I've never had one that was friendly and fun and was a competition horse, so it's kind of nice.
Yeah. I think that's our first horse riding jumper.
That was like a whole language I didn't understand. Like the world of horse showing, I think is the word you used, and you mentioned like a specific kind, like I know there's the Clydesdales on the Super Bowl commercials, and that's about it. Like I do not speak horse. Mr. Ed is like the extent of my horse experience back in the 80s.
Yeah. It's a tax deduction if nothing else, because you always lose money.
Yeah. And are you a crunchy or creamy peanut butter person?
Oh, I am definitely a Skippy light, creamy, like.
Oh, brand and sort of fat content specific. Like
Yeah,
that is
style. Yeah, really leaned in. Does Harley like peanut butter?
Harley likes everything. He like licks at you like a dog. Like he follows you around. He's just a happy guy.
Okay. I didn't know if that was the reason why. Like you guys would just share a,
you
share
bonded over a jar of peanut butter.
With apples or something.
I don't have his own.
Okay. So, since I know you're a Bluebird now, doing the whole thing, I know you as an exec comp, goddess or guru. And so that's what I wanted to have you on for. And by the way, I will give you mad props for not calling me out already. So
out yourself, Sean. Out yourself.
Yeah, I'll help myself. It's now probably a year and something ago. Recorded this before we had the little pause when I switched companies. We recorded, and there was a series of a couple episodes that got recorded but never released. And Liz was one, and it really took her a long time to A, give me crap, and then B, then come back on. So I appreciate you coming back around, and we will make sure this gets put out there shortly this time. Although I wish I had the old one because I'd go back and see if your answers are the same and see if they're different. So to start with, a lot of what we talk about is broad base. Give us what you think are the top differences between broad base and exec comp beyond the obvious dollars. But really the bigger issues that have to be tackled.
I think one of the biggest things is in broad-based, you focus so much on equity of the people, not stock and option equity, that, there are those pieces that aren't the same in terms of the leveling of the executives. And then I think you're so tied to the strategy of the business in exec comp. And you have the pay performance, and there's so much complexity in the compliance because it's ever changing. And so even though you do a lot of things the same each year or each quarter, It's always interesting. There's always something that comes up, and it's interesting answering to the C-suite when it's about their comp, but you're reporting it to the board. So it's sometimes can get iffy in terms of people being happy, but
Yeah. The other thing, I'm curious your reaction, Liz, that I used to tell people when I was in house and I'd be like teaching people up on exec comp is we spend all of our time in broad base talking about how it's about the job, not the person. But a lot of times at exec comp, it's really about the person, right? Because what a person does is often shaped by them just as much as the title, right? So you can't benchmark a CTO the same way. Like, it is a bit personal. So I guess I'd love your reactions to that. Like, do you see it that way? I mean, I'm oversimplifying just because I was trying to explain to people the difference. But like, how would you react if I made that statement to you?
well, I mean, we still have to answer to the stockholders, the shareholders, and ISS and Glass Lewis watch everything. So you
For
still
sure.
have to be in the right realm of, if it's a tier 2 or if it's the CEO, you can't be way outside the realm or you're not going to get a recommendation for sale pay. So a little bit agnostic of the person, but that's because I'm just a data nerd and very strict on compliance. But it does shift. I mean, it's like you have that unicorn hire and they're very invested in what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think that's where setting the right performance goals can help and get to the right place.
Talk about, it's interesting you said you end up talking about their pay, and this is always the part that just would, I would want nothing to do with going to the board or going to the C-suite to talk about their pay, and obviously not being as much as they probably want or what have you. So what are the nuances in dealing with the board, with that piece and being stuck kind of sandwiched in between the C-suite where you're figuring out their packages and the board?
Well, your board is comprised of so many different types of people generally, and their backgrounds are so different, but rarely do they have a background in comp or really have deep HR knowledge. And you might have one person that does, but they vary by the types of industries or whatnot they pull the individuals from. So it's a lot on education because that's not their day job either. So I think you have to share not too much to overwhelm them or bore them, but enough to make them understand why you're recommending what you are.
And I guess the other piece that comes up is, and I don't know, an exec comp, they're getting paid differently across the C-suite, correct? Um, how do you how do you square that, or is there a lot of stuff that happens between C-suites, and how do you
Stuff.
explain that this person is gets more or less than you? Like, how do you navigate that piece? Because I think I'm definitely more a broad-based person, and it's kind of like, okay, we roll this out, and to your point, I think Liz, you highlighted it really well. It's about pay. It's being equitable, and so you have this thing to fall back on. That's kind of like, well, we have to be equitable. And in the C-suite, I don't really think they give a shit. And so, how do you navigate that?
There's a hierarchy that usually falls in that, but you're benchmarking to your peer group a lot of times, or at least looking to that. And so there's you can look at it through an equity lens, I suppose, but it's more about the external and who you're. My lights just turned off because I'm not moving. It's more about who their peers are in that group and like industries, like revenue, like size.
Yeah. Yeah. What I found is there is always I mean, and I'm going to overgeneralize and it's totally wrong, but totally right at the same time. Like, executives are really competitive people. So there's always an element of comparison that comes up. If they trust you, they're going to ask, right? If they can see it. If my name's in the proxy and I can see somebody else's name in the proxy, I'm going to ask that question. And they, of course, like, you're going to compare. Humans always compare. And it's more, can you point to something in a peer group that says, look, it's just how it works, right? HR leaders make less than CFOs. Sorry, right? But then there are things that are common that give you a place to rest, right? Like, by title, bonus percentages tend to be somewhat similar, right? So there's elements, Sean, that I think I found you could point to and say, look, we do value your contribution similarly in this way, but we can't ignore the market. And here's how we do that, right? So there's a lot of like one-on-one conversation that I found happened with those leaders to get them over their natural comparison competitive instincts. And
Another
then you're
thing is
done.
you don't see a good mix of different women versus men or different ethnicities when they're at that level. It's just, it happens
It's
that way.
you.
We're still in
Yeah.
the world. And so that's another piece that can look very strange and you can still be aware of and not like it. But It falls
Yeah.
more on the order of the different executives, or if you're having 3 NEOs, or if you're having 5, it can look very different.
Before we jump into best practices, do you need to do 1 or 2 jumping jacks to get the light back on? So we want kind of like,
How much arm waving do you
look at
have to
how much.
do to
Look,
hey!
Liz is a tiny. You're not big enough. I'm big enough. I just barely move. You're so tiny. You just like didn't even like. You just kind of were hiding there. Um, Paul and I are very cognizant now. When the light went off, I'm like, oh great, we're gonna have another technical issue.
Right.
So like, I'm good. So with all those differences in mind, or those differences, why don't you start with like, the best practices you've seen, which I assume you do. The best practices when you're, evaluating or putting together an exec comp program that's aligned to the business.
I think so much is about compliance and the performance levels being right. There are different effects to the business based on what type of criteria you're using. And so the taxes may be different, or executive is set on what they want. And it's just not, I won't say compliant, it's not in best practices for, especially what ISS and Glass Lewis would like. And so much comes from them on, best practices and these things that you have to really I learned not to say no, just no, but, or yes, and this is where we're trying to get. If you'll share that with me, then I'll try to back into the right way to do that, so that it's good for everybody. But you always keep the shareholders in mind because they have great visibility into what's going on.
When you're setting up the program, again, that's fascinating to me. Like how involved are you in choosing the financial vehicles and the timings and everything that goes with that, as well as like what are the key drivers to the performance, across each role?
I mean, EBIT is always a hot top, one that they love to use. TSR is another that you see a lot. It really
Which
depends on
which help us out.
sorry,
Come on.
total shareholder return.
Okay, yeah. So I was
So
going to make sure luckily from my prior life I knew, but I know it's not a common comp term. Yeah.
I'm terrible at using acronyms. Um, but you see a lot of things consistently over similar groups. I'm going to see something very different at a very mature company like Honeywell, or a startup that's in SaaS, and so you're just going to see very different types of things. And
Yeah.
again, that's what you see. Different things come out. You can't say you're just like everybody else.
Yeah. I will say, for those that are listeners that are earlier in career thinking about their different paths, one of the big differences I found, I consulted with in the exec comp practice of one of the first firms I was with, and what I learned from that stuck with me forever is the financial statement fluency that's required. So it's one
Mm,
thing if you're a comp person, of course you understand, revenue minus cost is profit, but how do you actually calculate sort of different financial ratios? Why would you choose EBITDA versus something else? What is EBITDA, and what are the things or the choices that a executive, a CFO, or other leaders can make that affect that number differently from
mm.
gross profit or gross margin, right? Like that financial statement fluency is just totally different. And the board expects you to know what it is. Like they're not going to pause and explain to you why in a capital intensive business the DA in EBITDA means something very different than at a software company, right? They just expect you to know that. So there's a different expectation of financial nuance and literacy to be in the exec comp space at a publicly traded company in particular, because you just need to know that the comp committee is not going to give you grace if you recommend a measure that's kind of dumb, right? Like you've got to have that fluency. And World of Work always taught that sort of financial statement course with the exec comp practitioner in mind, because it's just a different ball game than other parts of comp, without a question.
And another part of it is the tax implications are so different, and
Yeah.
they're having tax consequences, either to the company or to the individual. And then if you have a change in control or something, and you look at the golden parachute, just a little bit of money can make a huge tax difference. So you look at where you can invest things, but I think when you set out grants, sometimes you don't know what's going to happen. With the tariffs that came, we had executives, was kind of a trend asking for performance measures to be changed. And
Hmm.
the best practices, you can change them for the next cycle, for the new grant, but the ones that are set are set. And but that's a big impact when something like that happens.
Yeah. And as much as we'd like to think, how often do tariffs happen, right? Well, not often, but we said that during COVID. How often does a pandemic happen? We said that during the 2008, global financial crisis. We said that during .com. So,
Well, how often does stuff happen? Like, if you just
right.
roll that up,
That's
like,
the
how often does stuff happen?
right.
Like,
I think that's the point, right? Like
yeah,
any one of these things happens once in a career, but things will happen 10 times in a career. And your ability that's why like the expectation of fluency. Well, what does this mean for the business? Right? A tariff is affecting our cost structure in this way. How does that flow through into the measures that matter? If it's affecting everybody, to what extent does TSR become a thing? Right? Like,
yeah.
that's the hurdle that you are dealing with on the exec comp front side. That's different than broad base.
And I
And
think the
when they get paid or
complexity
get a
of
bonus, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
If they get paid or get a bonus in a time when general employees don't, that's always a real. I mean, you see that CEO pay ratio, and when the company's not necessarily in a great place, and the employees feel that impact, but then the executives who could make some decisions aren't necessarily in the same place. It can become a tough spot for employees to be happy.
Yeah, I think the added complexity for me is the time horizon of which you're looking at how they vest that, so vesting to your point, if I change the metrics going forward on this, I've got one set of grants that are on these metrics. And if I do change the metrics, like to cover like for the next one, that makes those potentially higher. Like there's a longer horizon where that kind of cascades over a period of time versus I
Yeah.
feel like in broad base, even when you do some equity, they're all on a standard equity thing. It's kind of like, their options or their, whatever
You would
PSUs.
hope, but
Yeah.
not
Something more
necessarily.
yeah, well, just more simplistic when you talk about the
Yeah.
drivers. And so, they kind of are what they are, right? Like share value moves if you're getting options, like fine. But whereas you keep changing how it's measured ish over these years, you have to do a look back basically to say, well, what does that mean for the prior years that are still out?
Well, and those performance grants can vary a lot. And each year can have a different metric, or it can have a weighting of a metric and be, 50% time and 50% performance. And then, sometimes you have to hit all the metrics for the grant to vest, or it could be a sliding scale and a part of the grant to vest. So it's really hard too on the finance side to know, how much you're going to incur expense for.
How fast do you see exec comp in a particular company um, change methodologies? And I know this isn't exactly exec comp, but the example that comes to mind is me like the vesting schedules, right? You've definitely seen over the past 3 to 5 years a myriad of different vesting schedules show up, and how fast do companies um, adapt or change or make those changes? Then how do you deal with those historically and looking forward?
I think a lot of it has to do with the maturity of the company and the space that they're in and how finances are impacting the company. Because sometimes your burn rate is high, and you don't have as many shares to grant, and you have to make some changes. Or we have something like the clawback policy that everybody just loved. With the little R restatement, there's that clawback to executives where you have to calculate things, but only certain types of grants can you call back for that. So I think they're different drivers, different vehicles, but it really depends on how mature the company is.
It's to me, it's just fascinating. Like, what percentage of a company is that? Like, I'm just, it's not many humans, right? What percentage? How do you equate the time? These are the remedial questions I ask. Like, how long does it take? Is it the same as a broad based program to do the exec comp because of its complexity, et cetera? Like, this is the part I'm baffled at.
I think sometimes it can become consuming when you're getting ready for a board meeting, or if you're having to go back to the shareholders to ask for more shares. So if you have a project like that, or like the clawback policy was, or you're doing a change of control um, pieces, then I mean it can really take a lot of your time. But those aren't the people that you say wait for. So you want the time.
Yeah. I mean, Sean, one way we see it in sort of the data that we track around comp teams is if you're a publicly traded company, typically you've got a comp team of 5 or more, right? Just because there's a correlation between sort of size of company and comp team as well. And one of them tends to be dedicated to exec comp. And you're talking about a pretty small population, right? Exec can be defined in a variety of ways, but it's almost always less than like 1% of the company, right? So you're talking about 20% of your comp capacity to 1% of the company. Like that gives you that's not measuring in time, that's measuring in very rough headcount dimensions. But that tells you it's pretty all encompassing, right?
Well,
Like,
but I don't think we always get that luxury because everybody runs so lean.
Yeah.
Like when we did the IPO for First Data, and like I said, it was the largest one of 2015. We had 3 people doing the equity side, and they had 24,000 people with equity. They had gone private, and they were going public again. So you had all of those people, already had existing
Yeah.
equity. And then we did a reverse stock split and 2 system implementations at the same time. And you've got, the different types of shares that go with that, and
For sure.
writing the first documents and everything. So,
Yeah. But it is a resource intensive process is sort of the key, right? Like between, some of it's relatively easy. I mean, getting data from peers. Okay, fine. That's actually pretty simple these days. But like the amount of time to story tell that to a board, the amount of time spent to story tell that to the people who are affected, because you're typically hand delivering to an extent. Like you are customizing the communication per person often at that point. The moving parts around equity vehicles and the frequency with which they might be vesting and the tax consequences, the Section 16 reporting, the deferred comp program and the cycles of that. Like there's a lot of things that are underneath the surface of making a comp choice. Like that's what makes it a dedicated job quickly or a team's job, because of the ongoing. There's just a lot of stuff that nobody realizes happens when you've got a public company exec comp program that I know caught me by dramatic surprise when I stepped into my first role at Morningstar. It's like, holy smokes. Like I knew this was a thing, but I didn't realize how hard it was to sort of keep that ship running all the time.
and I think the partnership with finance and legal are just, they have to be strong, or you're kind of lost with things. And having a strong, SEC attorney, it's fantastic. Like that becomes your partner for everything. And I've been a habit of, before anything goes out, I need review from both, and everybody has to sign off. Everybody needs to be in the same place. And I don't like surprises. Like even Christmas present surprises are bad. And so that's my goal too, is for none of them to have surprises. So everybody's fully read in and hopefully bought in before we go to the board.
Yeah, Sean, I don't love lawyers, but this is the circumstance where I did, right? Like that, your SEC counsel, whoever it is, if it's a general counsel, if it's an assistant, like whoever it is that's, knows the rules and knows the circumstances, like they become your bestie quickly in public company exec comp. Like, do I need to report this for this person? How many days do I get? This executive is leaving. How long do I get before I have to tell the world about it? And what we're doing for their interim replacement. Like all of those things are really hard to keep up with. And, if you're the exec comp goddess like Liz, you might know that, but I know I never did, right? I was very dependent on my internal legal team to keep me honest, right?
I mean,
Like
there's a lot more CYA. I mean, just the level of people and risk exposure, right? Beyond
totally.
that, just that you're covering the company, right? At some level, the ramifications, not only in the courts, per se, but the court of public opinion, become really large, I think.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
far
And
down? Go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I was gonna. How far down? Like, how far down do you go? Like C minus 1, 2? What's the norm for how far down this gets carried? And I guess, and I think I'm wrong, so I'll put this out there. It's a little more of a gray line now as it moves through, correct? Like in my mind, it used to be like, here's the people who have exec comp and there's above, and then below that it's there. Like, how would you describe those two things?
Well, if you're talking about equity in the grants, as opposed to just the executive carve out, I mean, I've worked in several companies where everybody had equity, and that can be tough. Like it's great in thought, but when you've got somebody that's hourly and they have equity and they'd rather have cash to go to the grocery store in certain times, or if the share price has dropped so much that they're going to invest and need to pay taxes and not have shares to withhold. So, I mean, it gets very complicated with having everybody. Involved in the equity program, but I think education with that is key. But since I usually put in the total reward space and have that as well, I don't really put a hard line in there. We show certain things to the board based on what their preference is or what that particular company looks like. But in terms of where you cut something off or where you stop work, it just all flows together.
Yeah, I bet across your experience, like the definition of executive, and I put that in little quotes that nobody could see but me, but like it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people,
Yeah.
right? And there's some legal definitions of executive officers, named executive officers, Section 16 officers. Like those are
Yeah.
technical answers, but what's an executive? I've seen that, using your terminology before, Sean, like N-2, right? Like CEO 2 levels down, like VP plus is executive. I've seen it be, nope, we are talking about the CEO and their direct reports, right? Like that's sort of a choice, right? That a board's going to have an opinion, company size and norms become a thing. Like I think that's all. I would imagine, Liz, you'd agree. Like it's all over the place, and it's really, what does it mean for us here? And now, how do we govern decisions? How do we manage things given that definition?
It's interesting on the stuff where you mentioned, having to having to manage all the way down where stock goes and that being part of that kind of exec comp team and part of that. Because the flip side of that education, Paul, I would argue, is when you go to a comp commit, when you're talking to C-suites who are on there in general, you're kind of like, you guys need to understand what you're getting and what this is and what it is. And that's a kind of a you problem, right? When you start pushing that all the way down to the organization, I think there starts to be that, oh, you got shares, we're going to get rich thing, right? And that, as you both smile, as you've been around a long time, like,
Still waiting for that moment. Yeah.
yeah, that may happen, that may not happen, that, there's a lot of there's a lot of misconceptions, and that to your point, Liz, it can get even worse from a misconception to, well, good news, you took those shares, but you have to pay tax on them, and you're not going to get them until there's a change of control. You're like, what, and how do you explain that? So I think that to me is kind of an interesting thing that you brought up, point of that role. Whereas I would argue to what you both said earlier, if you're just going to the board and to the executive suite, you're like, everyone should be financially literate in this thing because it's your world. When you start moving down, like they're not, and they don't have access to the same information, the same people. They can't call the corporate attorney and ask a question the same way. That's it. It's a pretty interesting point.
When people get shares and they invest and then they don't understand the tax consequence there, or in different countries it's when they're granted, then they're not happy that you're taking things from that grant, even though that way they don't have to come up with the cash,
Yeah.
which they also don't seem to like to do. So I get a lot, Liz, we don't like your rules. And I'm like, they're not my rules.
Not my
Like, I'm
rules.
sorry that you're really unhappy with me, but
The
the
global
SEC.
thing is really interesting, I think, because that piece in particular to me, when I first started working at global companies, where you're like, well, hey, we're going to offer you guys these shares. And, someone in the US might take options and be like, whatever, no harm, no foul, right? Until it happens. And then someone in Belgium might be like, well, I'm not going to, why would I do that? Like, I'm so out of control and I got to pay tax on those. Like,
And
it's not
taxes are
equitable.
ridiculous. Some
Yeah,
places
when it's
are.
not is that equitable, right? I mean, is making the offer equitable when you have to front the tax? Is that a thing? And so I think that is a nuance too that I think complicates it when you go global with how are you equitable in granting those, and do you have to come up with different vehicles for everybody?
Well, I mean, some countries can only get you to invest in cash. Like you could only do certain things. You can have kind of a fan program, and it does become, a difference where it is. But it's like, think globally, act locally, and get the right vehicle for each person. But that's also where how far into the organization do you go down? Because I think some people are really detached from the person on the ground sometimes, and they think everybody wants equity, everybody wants this to be a component of their total rewards, but it doesn't energize some people the same
Mm.
because it's not the same impact.
No, I think your point is valid around, don't go senior, but if you push that down to a manager level, right? And you got two peers, one in the US and one in Belgium. And the person in the US is super excited. The person in Belgium's like, I can't afford to do this. So why is Paul getting so much more, basically out of doing the same job just because I'm here, and the company doesn't care because they're not offering me a vehicle that makes it equitable. To your point, Liz, like you don't make the rules. Don't hate the player, hate the game, although I'm sure they hate the player plenty. So,
Well,
yeah.
and I think we run into that with broad base too, and total rewards, and that somebody wants a gym membership in one country, and that doesn't resonate in another, or they don't want a car allowance, they want somewhere to go biking. So I mean, it's just a difference of culture or a difference of what value to that employee.
So if I had to say one or two places, if people were starting to look at an exec comp program or whatever, what are the one or two big key pieces of advice you would share with the world when we do actually post this episode?
I mean, compliance is king. Like, you have to be compliant and know what there's little changes can really affect. So I think, the financial and tax implications and the compliance piece and governance.
It sounds like also buy coffee for legal. And I know, Paul, you're trying to make
Monster.
me say how
Monster.
important attorneys are. Yeah, buy a Monster. Oh no, she's gone dark again on
The
us.
lights went off again.
You need to get the lights some Monster drink. Yeah, so make sure you have legal and finance involved. I would argue, though, in general, not argue, but I think it's a great suggestion for all of comp. Like, be super financially literate. The legal piece, like, well, get me in trouble at home. Whatever, who cares about lawyer? But but like the financial literacy piece is a really good thing to have in your pocket.
It is,
Yeah.
but it's just understanding all your rewards. The more you understand them, the more, and you explain them to the employees, the more it drives the right understanding and behavior. I mean, a lot of our health benefits, people don't understand the right way to use them to get the most out of them. So I think it's translatable to other places.
That's right. So we always ask as we kind of get near the end, and you're in a unique position because you've got all the total rewards, exec comp, you've done it all in the comp space. If you could solve any one thing in HR automagically, kind of wave a wand and solve it, what would you solve?
I think a better understanding of the programs in general, and why we do certain things that we do, and it's not just because we want to. So I
Sorry.
think
I'm laughing because that's like the nicest Southern version of let's make the stupid people go away. Like, you wanted to say it. You want a little insider information for all those listening. Liz may have hinted she was going in that direction, but boy, was that like the sweetest way of saying it.
And I'm happy to spend time with anybody that wants to learn more than just learning out.
Is it really anybody? Really anybody? Like,
this is why, like, I'm almost afraid for you to compliment me someday, because I know underneath it there's got to be some like snarky, like, oh, he's that idiot.
I'm a ginger.
Like,
I'm so nice.
I said all gingers. Yeah. Okay.
Right, that's the brand. That is absolutely the brand. That redheads are absolutely kind to everyone.
Well, Paul, the one thing I know is I'm not going to argue with Liz. That's how kind, and I'm not going to argue. Super stoked you were able to come on and run it back with me again. We upgraded with Paul, so this time you got two
You got a referee.
Back and Paul. For those listening, you can find Liz LinkedIn. I have called her several times. She didn't confess that I called to talk about exec comp stuff. She loves this shit. So I'm literally and like, as much as you came from marketing, you definitely found a home and a place that you love, and proof positive that she will talk to stupid people, Paul, and explain things. She did explain some things to me. So prior. So she will spend the time. So I really appreciate it, Liz. We're going to drop this before World at Work. Liz will be there, so you can hunt her down at World at Work. So make sure you find her, and we'll post this. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank y'all.